In our fast paced lives, we often overlook the critical role that our mental stamina plays in shaping our interactions and relationships. Whether you're a caregiver, a parent, or simply someone looking to enhance your emotional intelligence, understanding how to cultivate a strong and agile mind is essential. Today, we'll introduce a program called MindShape and unpack the 6 adverse mind inhibitors that we call AMIs. These emotional blockers can affect how we think, react, behave, and respond. By identifying these potential pitfalls, we can pave the way for healthier communication, stronger connections, and a more positive family environment. So, if you've ever felt overwhelmed or unsure in your caregiving journey, this episode is for you. Let's embark on this exploration together and discover how a better mind shape can lead to a flourishing family life. Hi, I'm Shari Bailey, and I'm joined by Michael Nash. And today we'll be exploring a mental well being program that we designed called MindShape, how this program helps to optimize mindsets, and how you can ultimately improve your mental outlook. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Sherry.
So, similar to what we did the last episode, we had a question come in from Tanya in Jacksonville, Florida. And the question is, how can I better manage my mental health while carrying out my caregiving duties? And man, that's a loaded question. But thank you, Tanya, for the question. Uh, we felt like it was no better time than to introduce MindShape. So, if I can quickly get into the high level details of MindShape. MindShape was created by us, and it really was a reflection of the journey that we've had as caregivers. Although the program can be used beyond caregiving, for the purpose of this episode, we'll keep it focused on the caregiving experience.
Okay.
So, as part of the program, there are 6 adverse mind inhibitors, which we call AMIs, that affect the way we think, behave, respond, and react. And these 6 are betrayal,
Mm-hmm.
resentment,
Mm-hmm.
insecurity,
Okay.
neglect,
Okay.
grief,
Mm-hmm.
and guilt.
Okay.
And I'm sure all of you are thinking of numerous other potential AMIs.
Mm-hmm.
But for the purpose of this program, we focused on these key 6 AMIs because if you've ever felt a sense of betrayal or resentment or insecurity or neglect, grief, or guilt, it could really get in the way of you cultivating healthy relationships and connecting with people on a deeper level.
Yeah.
So, in this episode, I really, again, want to keep it based on caregiving, although
Okay.
this could stem across drug substance abuse, domestic violence, every aspect of life that anyone can deal with. But from a caregiving perspective, let's start unpacking this
Okay.
with betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of a time that maybe you or someone you know have felt betrayed that could affect the way that they think, react, behave, or respond from a caregiving perspective?
That's a good one. I think when most people hear the word betrayal, um, they don't like automatically put things in that box because that's a hard word, betrayal. Usually when people get to that mindset where they say, "Okay, you've betrayed me," there were numerous little things that were done that made you say, "Okay, I'm gonna put that on my notes. Okay, I'm gonna put this here. I'm gonna put that in the back of my mind." But I think what happens is, especially from a caregiver standpoint, betrayal doesn't always look like betrayal, whether it's intentional or unintentional.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not speaking from personal experience, just me, being blessed to be on this earth for a number of years. I've seen different things happen and take place where, one could consider that betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, um, me and you want to have a date night,
Mm-hmm.
right? And previously have someone commit to say, okay, I'll keep the kids for you, 'cause that's a challenge for us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then 10 minutes before we're about to walk out the door, the person says, well, I can't do that because I have to do something else, right? Now, granted, it may be a justifiable last minute change, But oftentimes, as a caregiver, because so many different things are going on, the first thing you was like, so it becomes you chose them over me.
Yeah.
So that could be a sign of what we deem betrayal. It's like you betrayed, your loyalty to me to go to that person. And I think in order to identify and to dig deeper into it, to maybe have that conversation with that person, you have to have an open mind to understand the why, the whens, the what, how could you do that in order to identify, to dig down into it. And a lot of people don't like to deal with betrayal, because it hurts. Because a guy walking down the street that I don't know can't betray me. Typically, the person that we put in that betrayal box is someone that's close to us,
Yeah.
and that's a tough piece. That's a tough piece.
Yeah, and the example that you gave is a good one because to most people, if they're anxious about doing something and then something stands in the way of that, there's a sense of disappointment. But when it comes to people that are constantly caregiving and don't
Hmm.
get a break and
Hmm.
really need that essential
Yeah.
break and they feel like they're so close to getting it and then it doesn't happen, it shatters their world,
Yeah.
right? And it's a little bit, I
Deep,
will say, more extreme,
deeper.
deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where it crosses the line of disappointment into
Hmm.
betrayal or the
Yeah.
feeling of
Yeah.
being
The
betrayed.
feeling, but that's a good one.
Yeah,
Because again, we're speaking from a caregiver's perspective,
hmm,
not to point fingers, but just to bring you inside of the other side of that coin. You know, Again, that same person in that situation was like, "What's the big deal? I mean, I couldn't make it.
yeah,
I'll do it another time." But oftentimes, like you said, because so much goes into when you are 100% the caretaker, right, or the caregiver, a lot of things go into get into that space where you can say, okay, I can do something extra. And again, the other person may not know that. So, I think, again, we go back to the betrayal piece where, from our perspective as caregivers, it's like, wow, you're just like, wow. But from that person, it may not be that deep,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
think that's where the open dialogue and us bringing these conversations to the forefront, to really dig deeper into why that behavior is like that.
right. And now bringing it back to the Mindshape
Yeah.
program. This Mindshape program information is available at laylasgift.org, and that will be in the caption of this episode. But when we talk about the Mindshape program, it essentially discovers your deep feelings
Mm-hmm.
around
Hmm.
betrayal and unboxes these
Yeah.
feelings to help you better understand. First of all, do you feel it and you don't
Hmm.
realize it?
Hmm.
Or are you feeling it and
Yeah.
realizing
Yeah.
it, but you need to address it?
Yeah.
Because the way that we, again, think, react, behave,
Hmm.
respond, if we're holding in feelings of betrayal, it will look very different
Yeah.
than if we're not holding in
Yeah.
feelings of betrayal.
Yeah.
So the next one is resentment. And, I'll take this one. One example that comes to mind here is when you marry someone, as an example, and you decide to have children.
Hmm.
And let's say one of your children is diagnosed with a syndrome,
Hmm.
and something happens along the way, and you decide to end the marriage. You get a divorce, right? I've seen I've been divorced personally, but not from, I don't hold feelings of resentment from this perspective, but I do have individuals that I have ran across
Hmm.
that feel a sense
Hmm.
of resentment
Hmm.
because they feel like their partner,
Yeah.
who was supposed to most understand
Hmm.
the challenge of raising a child with special needs,
Yeah.
has abandoned them
Mm.
and now has caused them to be a single parent,
Hmm.
which makes it very difficult in their perspective
Hmm.
to date again
Yeah.
with having a
Mm.
special needs child because a lot of people can't handle that.
Yeah.
So they feel a sense of resentment.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah.
How do you feel
That
about that?
that's a big one. Again, like Sherry, I was previously married. Again, no resentment there. Uh, but what I recognize is, as a parent, right, we are assumed that nothing about our children bother us.
Mm-hmm.
That's the assumption. You're the parent, you're supposed to love them unconditionally and all these other good things. Which, in case sometimes that's easy, other cases sometimes it's
Not
not
so
as
easy.
easy, right? So I think that whole resentment piece, it gets bottled up, right? And the top is put on so hard that if you don't deal with it, it comes out like a volcano,
Right.
and it spills into other aspects of your life. Because if you don't deal with the resentment for something in a situation that we're talking about, like you said, one parent may decide this is too much for me, and that emotion is not dealt with or that
Right.
behavior is not dealt with, you're going to take it to the next relationship. And I don't care, you could meet the best partner on this face of the earth for your situation. But if you don't deal with that piece of resentment or feeling betrayed or whatever, you just take that into another relationship.
And that's if you can actually take it to
Yeah.
another relationship.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't even get that far because
Yes.
you're automatically kind of assuming
Hmm.
because this person gives similar traits
Yes.
like the other person
Everybody.
that or the another person that you don't want to take that risk,
Yeah.
right?
And they become your, if this makes sense, your resentment triggers,
There you
you
go.
know.
Hmm.
And so what happens is, before you'll see the whole thing through, you'll immediately put it back into that bucket, which is why, like you said, I don't have a number, but I could assume that, when people separate, because, maybe they're not married, well, just when a couple that share a love child is what I'll call it, right? And one person, for one reason or another, decides this is too much for me, right? And you separate, most people, it's like, if I just see 1 ounce of that behavior, all bets are off.
Yeah.
And that's because you don't deal with it. So now you don't get a chance to see that person for who they are. You may meet a man. I'll use myself for example, who, until Layla came into my life, I had never been exposed to any child with special needs.
Right.
Right now, I could have exhibited a characteristic or said, he's not lovey-dovey. That's a deal breaker for me. And then we missed the opportunity to build something great.
Right.
And I think it's key that we have to deal with these different
Emotions.
emotions and mental mindsets or things like that. But it all starts with recognizing what they are.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
mhm.
So the next AMI, insecurity.
Okay.
What are examples of this emotion relative to caregiving?
Okay. This is an easy one. Not because I experienced it, just because I think a lot of people um, exhibit, rather, it's small traits or big traits of insecurity, even if they don't want to acknowledge it
Yeah.
or accept that it exists. In a relationship, me and you, all of your attention goes to, let's just say, Layla, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, these are examples. Layla, if I'm insecure in our relationship, right? I could flip that and say, well, she doesn't really care about me. She pour all her love into the kids. What about
Yeah.
me? What about my needs? What about my wants? What about what I need to feel whole and all these things? But I think those insecurities, again, come back to, if they're not communicated, if they're not expressed, your partner's not a mind reader.
Right.
We can see different, maybe, behavior traits that say, oh, this person is insecure. But that's an easy one.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, I like that example. For me, the first thing that came to mind was, when Layla was born, she was diagnosed with a rare syndrome.
Hmm.
And there wasn't a lot of information out there with regards to standards of care,
Hmm.
the right things to do,
Hmm.
what not to do. So there was a bit of insecurity in my competence,
Oh, wow. Okay.
right? I did not know if I was doing it the right way
Yeah.
or the
Okay.
wrong way,
Hmm.
or if I remember there were times where when she initially got her feeding tube
Mhm.
put in, she had a really sensitive area
Mhm.
around the opening.
Mhm.
And from time to time, it would swell or it would have discoloration. And I thought I was doing something wrong, but I was assured by the physicians that it's healing and
Mhm.
it happens. And
Mhm.
depending on, how she tugs at it,
Mhm.
it could exacerbate it as
Yeah.
well. So there's a bit of insecurity, I think, from my perspective as a
Mhm.
caregiver
Mhm.
that I got from that.
Yeah. And that's a good one. And especially I think as a mother, right?
Yeah.
Uh, from what I and again, these are just my experiences as a as a man, right? As a mother, you guys sometimes oftentimes have this notion that you have to be perfect, right? As the mother, I have to be perfect, but we're not perfect beings. Most fathers don't deal with that guilt. They just don't.
I'm just gonna
Hopefully
do
I'm
what I
not
can.
I'm not offended anybody, but it's like most fathers don't deal with that type of guilt. But as a mother, you guys are constantly like, was I there enough? Was I nurturing enough? Was I loving enough? Was I hard enough? And a lot of those things will cause insecurities that may not even exist that you build in your mind. But once again, if you don't acknowledge a problem, you won't deal with it.
Yeah.
So I think again that the whole thing is acknowledgement, accepting that it's okay to acknowledge it, and then that's how you work on it.
Right.
You know.
Right.
But yeah, that was a good one because again, I'm a father, so I would never look at it from, am I doing right? I'm like, uh-oh, I think I broke her.
Yeah.
And I remember a story when that happened. I was like,
I remember.
Sherry, I think I broke Layla. And you started laughing like, what do you mean you broke her? I said, I think the thing that feeds her came up. You was like, calm down, I'll be there. I was like, no, I really think I broke her.
And I
Which is funny
understand
now that I
I
think about
understand
it.
why it
Yeah.
shocked you because I remember when it first happened to
Hmm.
me. So what happens is the tube can come out
Yeah.
if you don't have enough
Of
water
water.
in the balloon.
Hmm.
So because you think about it, the balloon, inflated in her
Hmm.
tummy is kind of the
Yeah.
locking mechanism. So if the water over time
Hmm.
leaks out, it
Hmm.
becomes so thin that the feeding tube
Tube can
comes
come out.
out.
Yeah.
So it happened to you. And again, I remember when it happened to me, I almost lost it because I was like, oh my gosh. And you have to learn how to actually replace
Replace
it.
it. Yeah.
So I remember when you said, I think I broke
Yeah.
Layla.
Yeah.
But
That's funny.
it's a very real thing.
Hmm.
The next one is neglect.
Okay.
When I think of neglect, I think of a space where you feel like you don't have a village.
Hmm.
I think of a space where you feel like you're doing it alone.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think oftentimes in the caregiving space, this is a very real emotion.
Yeah.
And sometimes it could be a very real thing in terms of you may not have enough
Yeah.
people around you. But I think as a caregiver, there's something inside of us where we want to have people
Yeah.
around us, right? And we want to feel overly supported. And even if we have, a balance of support,
Mhm.
sometimes it doesn't feel like it's enough
Yeah.
because there's so much going on and so many needs that we just need that
Yeah.
extra cushion, right?
Yeah.
So, in terms of feelings of neglect,
Hmm.
what examples come to mind for you?
Um, I don't really have an example, but something literally just came to me
Mm-hmm.
to try to describe it to a person who may not be a caregiver. It's almost like watching a silent movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are no words. You just see this person. And from as a person that may not be a caregiver, they're looking at you and your hair is all over your head and you're running from here and then you start this job and then you can't finish that one and you're running down the street and then you got one shoe on. It's like, and they're looking like, this person has really lost it.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality of it is, if a lot of times when you're a caregiver, you have to wear 19 different hats. And not saying that you don't wear 19 different hats if you're not a caregiver. That's not what I'm saying. Like again, I always say this show is not for us to divide and say we're better, we're you're worse. No, we're just trying to bring light to the world that we live in every day,
Yeah.
right? And so when you say what was it, neglect?
Yeah.
Neglect can be very simple. And a lot of times, as a caregiver, you have to wear those hats and you have to wear that permanent smile on your face, like nothing bothers me, because, I know in our situation, we never want to be a burden to anyone,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I'm blessed to have you. And I hope you feel blessed to have me, right? So when you don't want to be a burden to anyone, because we understand how much it takes, and I would not wish that on anyone if you didn't have to. And that's not saying I don't love Layla any less. Doesn't say I'm not blessed to do what we do day in and day out, right? But that feeling of neglect is, a lot of times it comes from us not saying I need help.
Yeah.
So again, it may look like a person who's looking at him and say, well, they always look strong, they're always happy, they don't look like they need anything. But as a caregiver, it can translate to no one cares.
Right.
No one cares that I haven't been able to go and just have a walk without having to do the things that I need to do every day in and day out for my child. A 10-minute walk by myself
Right.
with nobody pulling me or pinching me or punching me or the things that we deal with every day.
Right.
So I think that the challenge is for people to understand that no matter how strong we look, you still need help. And when we don't get it, sometimes it interprets like, it's almost like neglect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to clarify something when you said someone punching you. So in the special needs community, it's not a far thought
Yeah,
that the child or adult that has the special need
become
can be
aggressive.
aggressive,
Yeah,
right? So I just
yeah,
want to clarify that because
yeah,
that's an important note.
yeah.
And these are things that happen behind the scenes that a lot of people don't see.
See,
And to
yeah.
your point,
Mm-hmm.
when caregivers are dealing with not just the duty of caregiving but the emotional
Emotional
stress
piece.
that
Yeah.
comes with it, the physical stress that can come with it,
Mm-hmm.
it could really wear you down. And
Yeah,
to your point,
yeah,
when you feel like people are not calling to check in on
yeah,
you or see if you need help,
yeah,
it is a form of
yeah,
feeling neglect,
yeah.
right? So it's really getting to the bottom of these feelings that you may have and saying, do I feel neglect? Even though
Yeah,
someone intentionally didn't say, I don't care about
yeah,
you, I
yeah,
don't want anything to do with you.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be that direct. There
yeah,
could be indirect feelings,
yeah,
right,
yeah,
related to neglect.
yeah, yeah. That's good.
Grief is the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a very sensitive topic because grief is usually associated with the loss of someone.
Yeah.
And that happens very often,
Mm-hmm.
right,
Mm-hmm.
in the caregiving world. Unfortunately, it could be the person you're caring for,
Yeah,
or it could be the caregiver themselves.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, Grief can also be the loss of a dream,
yeah,
the loss of something that meant something to you.
yeah. That you had to give up. Yeah.
So when we talk about caregiving, when I think of grief,
Mm-hmm.
obviously there are many examples of loved ones departing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
The condition has taken over them, or uh, God has called them home,
yeah.
and that's obviously a very heavy weight,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that can affect everything
Yeah,
that a caregiver does because it's not just I lost someone
mm-hmm.
that I've cared for and I love,
Mm-hmm.
but I've lost someone that I've created a whole life routine around.
Yep, yep,
So
yep.
now you're starting all over.
Mm-hmm.
And in the midst of grieving their loss, you're also trying to find yourself again
Yeah.
because for
Mm-hmm.
for all you know, you've been a caregiver.
Yeah.
And that was who you are at the core.
Yep. Yeah. And it becomes a part of your life. And as you were talking, something just played in my head. So recently, I lost my dad. Right.
Yeah.
And the thing was, my dad was a guy. He was never sick. Right. Went to the doctors, got diagnosed, and within 1 year, he was gone. Right.
Yeah.
He's the guy that never been in the hospital. He was fortunate. He was in good health. His body was in good shape, and he was in his mid 70s. Right. So when he got sick, it was almost like whoa, where did that come from? And so my older brother was his primary caregiver, when he wasn't in the home, the like the
Hospice.
acute care
Or
centers,
yeah.
right? And I never thought about it from that aspect until you just said it. It's like when you get used to becoming a caretaker, once you finally settle into that space to say, okay, this is what I got to do. I got to do this for my parent or my mother, my father, my child, or whatever. You finally get to the point where you're okay with it. And then that person is gone. It's like you got to rebuild your brain and your thinking all over again.
Yeah.
So it's like you're grieving twice.
Yeah.
You're grieving for the loss of that person, and you're also grieving for what do I do now?
Right.
Like, what is my purpose?
What is my
For
purpose?
the last year, this was my purpose. This was his purpose. So the moment my dad left, it's like, okay, now he's gone. I don't have to worry about waking up in the middle of the night, making sure he's breathing. It's like, so what do I do in the middle of the
What's
night
the
now?
next move? Yeah.
And again, we are creatures of habit. I don't care who you are. We're creatures of habit.
What is it? It
21
takes
days,
21 days to create
right?
a
To create a
habit,
habit.
right?
So just imagine doing that for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years, regardless, whatever the time span may be. And you finally get to the space where you say, you know what, this is why I was put here,
Right?
to be that person. And then it's gone.
Gone.
It could really mess with you to say,
Mentally,
okay,
yes.
my purpose is gone. So now what do I do? Again, back to you have to recognize and identify these behaviors so that you can deal with them.
Yep.
Because if you don't deal with these different aspects, and again, like Sherry said in the beginning, these aren't the only ones. These are the ones that we have isolated and kind of picked out to want to have these conversations about. It's like just imagine a volcano. When you see a volcano erupt, it doesn't just happen from yesterday. You're talking years of building underneath of the surface to the point where it just can't hold it anymore and it erupts and typically it destroys everything in its path.
Yeah.
And that's what happens with pinned up emotions and these 6 AMIs that you don't deal with. You have to deal with them.
You have to deal with
Yep.
them.
Yep.
Yes.
So,
Yes. So the last one is guilt.
okay.
And whew, that's another heavy one.
Mm-hmm.
Guilt can come in all shapes, sizes,
Yeah.
and forms.
Yeah.
If I have to think of an example when it comes to caregiving, I would say when I initially got the diagnosis for Layla,
Mm-hmm.
I thought to myself, did I do something to create this condition in her?
Yeah.
Because, as a mom, you're holding
Yeah.
in my case, babies, because I had twins. I'm holding the babies. I'm eating
Mm-hmm.
the best that I can. I'm trying to nurture them in the best way that I can. I'm trying to keep myself healthy because if I'm healthy,
Yeah.
theoretically, they're healthy, right? So when I got the diagnosis, there was a bit of time I beat myself up and I thought, I know it sounds silly now in retrospect, but I thought, did I eat something wrong? Did I do something wrong? Did I sleep the wrong way? Did I not exercise enough? I wasn't sure if I had contributed
Yeah.
somehow
Yeah.
to the condition.
Yeah. And it's fun. It's not funny, but it's ironic that you say that because, we came up in the era, when they taught sex education in school. And it's like, okay, this is how a baby's made. This is how a baby's
Yeah.
conceived and these different things. So, I mean, they can teach you everything they want in a book, but until you become a mother,
Yeah.
right, it's different. It hits different, versus saying, okay, Sherry, you are a woman that can produce a child with the help of a man or whatever you want to call it, but you're never prepared for, you can't prepare for that
No.
until those babies are inside and you're like, okay, it's humans inside of me kicking me in the middle
Yeah.
of the night, right?
Right.
So that level of responsibility is big, right? So I would assume that you would try to hold yourself responsible for that. Not that you should, but as a mother, you would and say, okay, did I
It's
eat something
natural
wrong?
to.
Did I lay, especially with that being
Yeah.
your first two was your first, so it's like you don't know. You don't know. And until you go through that, I could see how you could say, the guilt. And then, the mind is a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
It will create things that don't exist. I call it the invisible man syndrome, where your mind is say, here's Layla. What did you do? You put a head on it. Did you get enough sleep? No. Put a neck on it. Did you eat or drink enough water? I don't think so. You put two arms on it, and before you know it, you have created this entire image in your mind that does not exist. You know, and as a mother, again, I keep going back to this mother thing because that bond is different. I don't care what any man says. I hold you to this. That bond is different when that baby is inside.
Mothers
It's it's
are,
it's, it's different.
typically the holders
Yeah,
of the children.
yeah.
We are the creators of the children. When I say creators, I mean, they're in our
You
bodies where
carry.
we
You're the
feel
carrier. Yeah,
everything. And there's
yeah,
a certain, as you said, bond that's created.
yeah,
And yeah, it was a very difficult time for me initially because I thought to myself, did I do something?
yeah,
And there were overwhelming feelings of
yeah,
guilt
yeah.
behind
And
that.
and and again, me knowing you is like the way your brain works. It's like, okay, it's that quality process improvement. And you're like, maybe I should have slept on the left side instead of the right side. Maybe I should have drunk 17 cups of water instead of 14.
Right,
Like, so
right.
I know how your brain works, right? So, but I'm assuming that at some point in your life you had to look that in the face and say, this wasn't my fault. This was God's way of bringing my angel into the world,
Yeah.
and I had to be okay with that.
Absolutely. I've said it probably 100 times now, but fast forward,
Mhm.
I now know my why,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
With Layla and Lana, I,
Hmm.
I I now know my why,
Hmm.
and we go back to the conversation around grief. Like, God forbid if Layla ever left this earth before me,
Hmm.
and because of the intensity of care that we provide to her,
Hmm.
I don't know if I would know what my purpose
Yeah,
is anymore.
yeah,
So
yeah.
again, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but
Hmm.
these are also kind of the hitting feelings. It's not just always the today feeling of betrayal,
Yeah,
resentment,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
insecurity, neglect,
yeah. Hmm.
grief, and
Hmm.
guilt. It's also the what if,
Yeah,
grief,
the hard
what if guilt.
conversations. Yeah,
It's all these things. It's not just the now, it's the
yeah,
what ifs too that
yeah,
affect caregivers and everyone,
yeah.
right? But within the caregiving experience,
Hmm.
like, you're always thinking, what if, right?
Yeah,
Um, so again, we wrap up with these six AMIs can really
yeah.
affect
Hmm.
how you react,
Hmm.
think, respond,
Yep.
and behave.
Yeah,
And until you really get to the core of if these six AMIs are affecting you and becoming mental blockers,
yeah.
once you identify whether they are or not,
Yeah.
then you could work to addressing
Testing them.
them
Yeah.
and understanding, you said it earlier, the triggers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And better equipping yourself with the tools and
Hmm.
resources
Hmm.
to better
Yeah.
equip
Yeah.
in the future any feelings
Yeah.
of these adverse mind inhibitors.
Hmm.
So Tanya, again, your question was, how can I better manage my mental health while carrying out my caregiving duties?
Hmm.
And it's all about understanding your mind shape.
Yeah.
And
That's good.
every person's mind shape is going to be different.
Different. Yep.
There is no person that's equal to
Yeah.
another.
Yeah.
There is no situation that's
Hmm.
equivalent to another.
Hmm.
Everybody has different feelings and
Hmm.
emotions that they're
Hmm.
dealing with.
Hmm.
And these are ebbs and flows, right?
Yeah.
So what you're feeling today could be different,
Yeah.
and what you're feeling tomorrow could be different
Yep.
than what you're feeling a year from now. But understanding your current mind shape
Yeah.
and your current mental infrastructure
Hmm.
will help you better understand how to manage
Yeah.
situations
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
forward.
Hmm.
And also, as these things fluctuate
Hmm.
in the future, which they will,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
It's a
Yeah.
continuum of emotions. You can now know how to navigate
Yep.
and adapt
Yeah.
to these feelings.
Yep. 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 I agree.
So, again, more information on Mindshape is available on the website laylasgift.org.
Hmm.
As always, we air every third Monday of the month, and this Caregiving Unboxed podcast is available on all streaming platforms. Until next time.
Yes.